Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking from Washington, D.C. Stay tuned. Later in the program, we'll have confirmation on the cadre course on the political economy of the American system. But first, let's look at the French political situation now. This, as we're recording in the afternoon of Friday, the 9th of January, we've just had the liquidation of all of the patsies, all of the suspects in this case. Patsies all liquidated. I would like to point out that I had broadcast on Twitter at about 7 o'clock this morning, several hours before it occurred. France, the Charlie Hebdo suspects have been reported cornered, but the MO, the modus operandi of the police, is to liquidate the suspects to avoid embarrassing interrogations, as in the case of Mohammed Merah in 2012, in the springtime of 2012, almost 3 years ago. And sure enough, all patsies have now been liquidated, and we'll get into why liquidated. But let's get into the why of this entire question and look for it in a somewhat unusual but fairly obvious area. This is not terrorism about freedom of expression or anything of the sort. This is not the revenge of the Muslim fanatics. This is geopolitical terrorism. It's cleverly disguised, has duped a whole lot of people, but it is geopolitical terrorism. And what I mean by that is, you'll remember there were, 35 attempts to kill General de Gaulle of France because he insisted on the independence and the dignity and the war avoidance policies of France. He did not want to become the battlefield of a limited nuclear war. He made sure that there would be no limited nuclear war and saved France in the process. He was therefore targeted by, in effect, the NATO establishment with dozens and dozens of assassination attempts. And something similar can be said of the Aldo Moro case in Italy in 1978. He was somebody who wanted to bring the Italian Communist Party into the government, and that led to would have led to the overcoming of the blocs, the Yalta division of Europe, and that would have ended the Cold War about 10 or 12 years earlier than it actually happened. Geopolitical terrorism designed to enforce, first of all, the division of Europe into the two rival military blocs, Warsaw Pact and NATO, and since about 25 years ago, it's a one-way street. It's only to assert U.S., British, NATO, CIA control, Wall Street control, City of London control over continental Europe in most cases. Now, let's look at the immediate prelude to the Charlie Hebdo, and that is the interview, the New Year's interview. This is a very important, major statement by President François Hollande on the Monday of this week. That is to say, on Monday the 5th of January, 48 hours before the Patsy killers broke in to the office of Charlie Hebdo, we have this interview. And this is a very important interview, which has, of course, gotten lost in the hysteria now. So what does he say? It's a 2-hour interview. It's basically saying, this is my agenda. It's kind of like a State of the Union address by François Hollande. And we'll talk about his personal predicament in just a minute. An unprecedented 2-hour interview for his economic policies, but also for foreign policy issues. And here's what he said. Hollande is talking. He says, Russian President Putin does not want to annex eastern Ukraine. He has assured me of that. And he went on to say that the Western sanctions against Russia, allegedly based on the situation in Crimea and Donetsk and Lugansk, those sanctions should be lifted if progress is attained in resolving the Ukrainian crisis. Quote from the president of France, I think the sanctions must stop now. Let me repeat that for you. The president of France categorically states the sanctions must stop now. The noise you hear in the background is the collapse of the U.S. British sanctions regime against Russia. I think the sanctions must stop now. They must be lifted if there is any progress. If there is no progress, the sanctions will remain. But he thinks that progress can be attained. It's within reach. And he goes on to say, quote, Mr. Putin does not want to annex eastern Ukraine. Monsieur Putin does not want to annex eastern Ukraine. He has told me that. What he wants is to remain influential. What he wants is for Ukraine not to fall into the NATO camp. And Hollande struck an optimistic note ahead of a conference, not much talked about here, on January 15th, that is to say in next week, middle of next week, specifically the 15th is next Thursday, there will be this conference in Kazakhstan, in Astana, the capital of Kazakhstan. And there, Hollande wants to attend that meeting. The basis of the meeting is President Putin of Russia, President Poroshenko of Ukraine. That's the one we call Pornoshenko on this broadcast. So Putin and Pornoshenko will be there, but the leaders of France and Germany are also expected to attend the meeting. That means Merkel and Hollande. And Hollande says, I will go to Astana on January 15th on one condition, which is that there should be a possibility of making new progress. If it's just to meet and talk without making any actual advances, then there's no point to that. But I think there will be progress. And never too far from his considerations, the article on this on France 24, France 24, they say they head to this, and that those sanctions include two large amphibious assault ships, two Mistral-class warships, which the French have built, are building, and which should have been delivered to Russia already. This is a 1.2 billion euro deal. This has been delayed. The delivery has been delayed until further notice, and France could lose thousands of jobs, international credibility, and face even a fine under international agreements. And, of course, everybody knows that France does not have any interest in these reckless, irresponsible, incompetent, crackpot sanctions in favor of the Kiev fascist clique, we may add. And it's only done because of the strong-arm pressure of Kerry and these other people. Right? By the way, Kerry, you got to hear Kerry speak French this week, and it's nothing to write home about. If you have a chateau in Brittany, you better speak French better than this vacuous, blasé, ruling class, skull and bones character, Kerry. Now, a couple of other things in this interview that are designed to freak out London and Washington. Hollande says France will not intervene militarily in Libya and is on the whole rather relaxed about Greece. He says, Greece, yeah, they're free to choose. These are unacceptable positions. Could there be a link between this interview and the events? Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C. It's the 9th of January. Now, we're going to get back to Hollande's landmark interview to France Inter, right? France Inter, which is the principal radio. It's the largest of all the various French radio stations. where he says the sanctions against Russia must end. It spells the collapse of the entire sanctions regime. And we'll talk about the implications for that conference in Astana, Kazakhstan. But first of all, I'm very pleased to be able to announce that we will indeed be holding the first of what I hope will become a series of seminars. This is a seminar in philosophy and economics and organizing, and generally questions that pertain to world historical political activity in the months and years ahead. And this is going to be held on the weekend of January 23rd, 24th, and 25th. And that's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Friday the 23rd, Saturday the 24th, and Sunday the 25th of January. The location of this is in Silver Spring, Maryland. Silver Spring, Maryland. It's well within the range of the Washington, D.C. subway system, the Metro. Silver Spring, Maryland, and it's on the January 23rd, 24th, and 25th. I know I've received a goodly number of inquiries about this, expressions of interest, and that was a great help. I thank everybody who communicated with me about this. I haven't been able to answer all of them, but that was a very important encouragement, right, to keep going and to be able to find a place to hold this. Now, I'm not going to announce any of the details here because it gets to be too long, but I would just do two things. If you want to take part, we want very much for you to register in advance. So here's the way you register. You send an email to taxwallstreetparty@gmail.com. Tax Wall Street Party. TAXWALLSTREETPARTY @gmail.com. taxwallstreetparty@gmail.com. Include your name and your phone number, and we will get back to you with the full particulars about registration. And I'm just going to leave it at that, except the other thing to say is try to read in advance for this course. You're going to get a whole lot more out of it if you prepare yourself. The most fundamental, the most basic, obvious thing is get a hold of my book, Surviving the Cataclysm, Your Guide to the Worst Financial Crisis in Human History. Get the 2009 edition, which was brought up to date to include the main outlines of the world derivatives and banking panic of 2008. So it includes the Lehman Brothers crisis and the, $27 trillion Federal Reserve line of credit for zombie banks, hedge fund hyenas, and others. So again, Silver Spring, Maryland, 23rd, 24th, 25th of January, 2 weeks from now. Register by sending an email to taxwallstreetparty@gmail.com. Include your name, include your phone number. We'll get back to you, and we'll be off to the races. In the meantime, read Surviving the Cataclysm, and if you can also read maybe with that, after that, parallel to that, I would get a hold of Plato's Republic and read, I guess it's book 7. I'm sorry, I don't have the reference in front of me, but the chapter of Plato's Republic that expounds on oligarchy, tyranny, democracy, timocracy, and other forms of rule. But in particular, the Surviving the Cataclysm. And I hope to see a number of people there. And there'll be more technical details about this next week. But please do now send your email request, taxwallstreetparty@gmail.com. Include your name and your phone number, and you will hear from us very soon. And I'm sorry to say, even those who have sent me emails, you better send another email to this address now, because we've had to reorganize the way this works technically, administratively, and so forth. Okay, so here's the story now. Hollande 48 hours before the shooting starts at Charlie Hebdo, Hollande essentially announces that he is going to wreck the sanctions structure of NATO against Russia. He goes on to say he will not invade Libya on his own. There had been pressure for that. Obviously, people in London, Washington, would like to see France bogged down in a new Algerian war, in this case in Libya, or a new Indochina war. A new Dien Bien Phu was being created for France by the Anglo-American geopolitical boutique. Hollande is not buying that. Rather, you notice Hollande is intervening in Africa where he thinks it helps, where he thinks there's uranium in places like Mali or the Ivory Coast and other such places. And we've been critical of those. And then there's this question of the Astana conference. Imagine one thing is if you have Merkel as a hopeless case of imbecility and submission and absolute subordination. If you had Merkel and France and Ukraine lining up against Putin, then Putin is isolated. But if it's France and Putin against Germany and porno, well, that's a whole different story, isn't it? And it means that the ability of this awful Merkel to do the bidding of the State Department will be significantly reduced. And you can bet that if those Mistral-class warships are released to Russia, will be pure hysteria coming out of the State Department, pure hysteria coming from that Kiev fascist clique. Okay, so we've got all these questions. France is setting up a military base in northern Niger, 100 Ks from the Libyan border, south of it. France is operating drones out of Niger, but this is all uranium-oriented. It's not oil-oriented in the name of what London and Washington might want. And then we get down to Greece, right? On the 25th, we're going to have the Greek elections. We hope to have a report about that from Athens here in this program. But the question is, Merkel has been putting stuff. Hollande says, no, they're free to choose their own destiny. We'll give you more about that in just a second. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. More on the landmark interview of François Hollande, President of France. 2 days, 48 hours before the shooting started at Charlie Hebdo, he announced the end of the sanctions against Russia for all practical purposes. If France exits the sanctions, then the sanctions essentially cease to have any meaning at all. We'll talk about why he might be doing this. And then the question of Syriza. Parenthesis now is that Merkel, in her consummate stupidity, has based her entire rhetorical posture on this idea, well, if you Greeks, right, if you lazy bums down there, if you vote for Syriza, I'm going to kick you out of Europe. Well, easier said than done. She wants to kick Greece out of Europe. She's covering her right flank from the xenophobic racists of Alternatives for Germany, right? They ran their whole European campaign, kick out the Greeks. So that's Merkel. And Samaras, the reactionary austerity ghoul, NATO, IMF, EU Commission, Troika enforcer in Athens. Samaras is the same thing. If you vote for Syriza, you're leaping into the abyss. Greece will exit the euro. And as I told you last week already, no, no, and no. There is no Grexit. There might be a Rauschmiss, right? There might be the throwing out of Greece. But that's not an exit. It's not an exit. It would be an expulsion. The Grexpulsion is what these reactionaries from Samaras to Merkel are talking about. So the big issue then is, would Hollande parrot the same hysterical Merkelite and Troika and Samaras rhetoric? And the answer is no. He said, Greece is free to choose their own destiny. We want them to respect their agreements, but they can decide that. Obviously, the Greek government should respect its agreements. Merkel, by contrast, had said the exit from the euro is almost inevitable if Syriza comes to power. Well, why is that? Does that mean that Europe has become sens unique, one-way street to reactionary politics? No. Merkel's position is absurd and ridiculous, and it reeks of her own submission and propitiation of the Anglo-American party power apparatus. What can we call it? All right. So here we have Hollande bucking NATO, CIA, City of London, Wall Street, you name it, Obama, Cameron, the entire crew. What is this? It's France, once again. Have the institutions designed by de Gaulle, have they achieved yet another victory over a mediocre politician such as Hollande has been? Remember, those institutions, right, when you take up your residence in the Élysée Palace, you are gripped by complexes of interests and of bureaucracy, right? The French civil service, all those people from the École Nationale de l'Administration, right? The School of Administration, one of the elite grandes écoles of France. So I think something like this has happened. He's been captured to some extent by de Gaulle's institutions. De Gaulle dead is more powerful than Hollande alive, but Hollande alive can stay alive thanks to the institutions left behind by de Gaulle. And then, of course, the fact that Hollande's popularity had collapsed. He's down to Jimmy Carter, George W. Bush levels, 20%, 15% sometimes. So he's got to do something. So it looked to me like that 2-hour interview was signaling a change of course, that something very different was going to happen. And now you see it, right? That it's enough with these sanctions. And if you destroy 2,000 to 3,000 jobs in the French shipbuilding sector, then that essentially seals your doom. And you're doing that for what? For the Anglo-Americans? And what have they done for you lately? So now we have this terror event, and I'll just jump to the chase. We'll see how much time we have to continue this. The big winner, of course, in these shootings and killings in Paris is the demagogue Marine Le Pen, the Vichysoise. Her pedigree comes straight from Marshal Pétain and the Vichy government, because her father, this old character, right, Jean-Marie Le Pen, was an official. He was a supporter of the Vichy government of old Marshal Pétain. So it's this kind of element that we're seeing. The Front National, Le Pen, really scurrilous attempt to scapegoat foreigners for the depression created by bankers, a new low, right? And we know where that method comes from, right? Who is most famous for scapegoating a minority, blaming them for the depression? We know who that was. We don't even have to say it. You know who. So this is what it is. So, and of course, she's now attempting to turn this to her advantage. There's supposed to be a unity march in Paris on Sunday, this coming. That would be the 11th. And we got all kinds of people there. Renzi of Italy is going to go there. The Spanish prime minister is going to go there. People, all kinds of heads of government, heads of state from all over Europe are going to be there. There's also going to be an interior ministers meeting, that is to say police ministers. You're going to have Eric Holder. You're going to have Cazeneuve as the host. And so forth. And they're talking about the Union Sacrée. The Union Sacrée is the all-party government, right? The national coalition that includes everybody. Well, last time you had that was 1914 to 1918, 3 million dead. I don't recommend that. But Le Pen has already made sure that this is unlikely. She wants to make it look like she was not invited, so she's been insulted, and she says that's the end of unity. You can forget the whole thing. we urge Hollande to stick to the course that he began in this France Inter interview, and that is to say, argue, impose, unilaterally, make real the collapse of the sanctions regime against Russia. This is absurd and obsolete. And go to Astana on the 15th and put this Poroshenko in his place. We need the France that can say no. This was a great tradition, that de Gaulle could say no. He could say, when NATO came to General de Gaulle with orders, the answer was very often no. Another term is l'exception française. France is exceptional. It has a special idea of itself, and it can therefore play an absolutely valuable and indeed indispensable role in the cultural and political life of the Western world. The other thing, of course, we have to note is the idiocy, the insignificance intellectually, morally of the left liberals who really don't understand anything. I would say right now we've had a couple of these intelligence community stunts or operations, I guess I'd have to say. We've had the interview. We discussed that in previous weeks, right, with the Rand Corporation and the intelligence community behind Sony, with the connections through Amy Pascal, and now we've got Charlie Hebdo. And what was Charlie Hebdo? Charlie Hebdo was a group at the beginning in the late 1950s and early 1960s, around 1960 when it was created. In the early years of the de Gaulle regime, it was a bunch of ex-Vichy sympathizers who set up a magazine called Harry Carey against General de Gaulle. So now, realness. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. I have to announce that for the second week in a row, the prison authorities at the Jackson State Prison in Michigan have refused our request, the request of this program and the GCN network, to interview Reverend Pinkney, who is now becoming one of the most prominent political prisoners here in the United States, right, held incommunicado once again this week by the prison authorities. We've been in touch with the warden's office, we believe, and the answer was it's not going to happen today, right? Because you have to go through a procedure to allow Reverend Pinkney to call out. So we're doing whatever we can to keep this in the public eye, and certainly we know next week on the 15th of January there's going to be the final sentencing event, the sentencing hearing, I guess, which the prison authorities and this local clique, right? We know the sheriff, Paul Bailey, the county commissioner, other people, right? This whirlpool operation. It's all under the aegis of Congressman Fred Upton and his corrupt Whirlpool Wall Street political machine, largest appliance manufacturer in the world. They would like to have that sentencing hearing secret, executive session, behind closed doors. Well, what is that? Where does that fit into the U.S. Legal tradition? Nowhere. This is an absolute monstrosity. So if you're going to do it in open court and do it in front of the glaring publicity of world public opinion, which is now more and more focused on Barbarian County, Michigan, and this operation with all white juries and jury pools that are packed with close cronies of the prosecutor, Mr. Sepik, and others. So we're going to try that again next week. So, but in the meantime, keep up the pressure on the Michigan prison authorities and keep this issue in front of the public on social media, especially as we build up to the 15th of January. Now, just a couple of concluding things about these French events. First of all, we can sum it up, right? It's the 15th of January in Astana, where Hollande could play an absolutely critical role. There's also going to be, we think, a Syria conference in Moscow at the end of January, where the French would obviously also play a role. There are also stories now that Foreign Minister Fabius, who has a bad record, is going to be dumped under the pretext of health reasons. So that might be another sign of a shift, that Hollande had figured out that he was going nowhere, that the Anglo-Americans had led him down the garden path, and they were going to then dump him. So that's maybe what he wanted to turn away from. General ideas about the French situation. As I said before, the left liberal mushheads, I would say at this point, there are not a few of them who would accept a general war now, deluding themselves that it would be a general war for freedom of expression and free speech. Where have we heard that before? 100 years ago we had the war to make the world safe for democracy. Now we might have a world war with far more casualties to make the world safe for free speech. And unfortunately, in both cases, we have operations that reek of intelligence operations. And I mean by that the interview, once again, with the Rand Corporation and the CIA, and now this case, which we'll get to in a minute. So it's, generally speaking, to solidify the dupery, the marché des dupes of these left liberals who are now posturing. They're so happy they can posture. And also, remember, they love to be duped. It's also anti-Assad, right? The other day in the morning, this is another interesting thing you can see on my Twitter. I put out in the morning that somehow, some way, the Anglo-Americans would try to turn this event into a reason to bomb Assad. Right? People who are sympathizing with ISIS kill people in Paris, and somehow in this echo chamber, this wilderness of mirrors of the Anglo-American mind, that becomes a reason to not bomb ISIS, but to bomb Assad. And sure enough, Andrea Mitchell, Mrs. Alan Greenspan, somebody who hobnobs with the people of power, right? Mind like a rag bag. She repeats what she's heard at the dinner table or whatever it is. And she says, well, maybe one way to start dealing with terrorism is to stop ignoring the civil war in Syria after 4 years and do something about it. And we know, of course, when somebody like this says, do something about it, she means bomb Assad. So it's anti-Assad. It's anti-Putin in the sense that here's Hollande saying some things that are actually helping Putin, and he gets slammed. It's anti-Tsipras in the sense that here he is. He's on record saying, let's not, in effect, let's not get too excited about this. The Greeks can choose what they want. Undercutting the hysteria coming from Berlin, right? Is Merkel, God knows, is she still compos mentis? We don't know. She's so excited over this Tsipras case. So it's anti-Tsipras. And it's anti-Hollande, because the idea is if Hollande wants to do anything positive, the Anglo-Americans are clearly going to back Le Pen. And I have to say a few words to people who have been deluded that Le Pen is a friend of Putin. That's a deception posture. That's maskirovka. That we do not allow. Le Pen is an absolute asset of NATO and the what can we say, the U.S. Anglo-American intelligence community. That's Le Pen. Whatever she says, you'll be amazed, right? That's the way demagogues work. But she's now been strengthened, right? She's now essentially the opposition to Hollande is Sarkozy fighting for attention, but Le Pen gets all the limelight. Now let's say a couple of things about who did this. The Kouachi brothers, right? We had two things going on today. We had the print shop at the area of Charles de Gaulle Airport, where we had the two shooters, we think, from the Charlie Hebdo affair, massacre, 12 people dead, one hostage. In this case, the two Kouachis were killed, of course, and the hostage made it out alive. Then we have the supermarket, hyper caché, super kosher supermarket at the Porte de Vincennes, and there we had this guy Koulibaly. You see him; he's the black guy in the photographs. He was killed, and 4 of the hostages, 4 dead allegedly. Right? We don't know any of this stuff, but just to situate the official story, So that's what we have. Now, who are these people? Well, Sharif Kouachi is known for two things. In 2005, he was arrested and jailed for a year and a half because he wanted to go to Syria and then cross into Iraq to fight the U.S. invasion forces in Iraq. So he is a militant, a guerrilla, a jihadi, whatever you want. He's a violent international operative and a patsy, of course. So this Kouachi, Sharif, went across, came back. So the police knew him. They knew his life, his death, his miracles. The police knew everything about Kouachi. And then later, I guess around 2008, there was a conspiracy, a plot, to bust a certain Belkacem out of jail. Belkacem, another bomber, another jihadi. His goal had been to blow up the certain stations of the Paris metro, the subway, in 1995. So we have Sharif Kouachi questioned by the police, and now he's a repeat suspect, repeat offender, what have we. And it turns out that Koulibaly was also a part of the attempt to bust out Belkacem. So the police knew all about these guys. It's essentially a cell. The two Kouachi brothers, plus Koulibaly, plus now this woman who's supposedly still on the run, and that is to say, Ayat Boumediene. You don't know anything much about her. There were a couple of others, but it's a cell. And you have a big police department. They can't keep a cell like that under surveillance. I can't believe it. Strange. Back to the Welcome to the second hour of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Now, as we've been telling you for some weeks, there's going to be a parliamentary election in Greece, and that's going to be on January 25th. And as far as we can tell from here, the Syriza party of Alexis Tsipras and others is favored to win by a narrow margin. Now, what it means to win and what the relations of the various forces in the coming new parliament might be, we don't know. Therefore, we have called upon a friend of this program who has done yeoman service in the past, right, giving us a series of reports, almost 3 years ago on the election that first catapulted Syriza, the left party of Tsipras and Tsipras himself, into European-wide fame. And that's Michael Chiotinis, who is now speaking to us from Athens. Michael, are you there?
Hello, Webster.
Hello there. Welcome back. And we're delighted we could get you at short notice. And we would just like to know, in the 10 or so minutes that we have, what's the situation, who's going to win, and one of the things we hear is that Syriza won't have enough to form a government, but I wonder whether they include that majority bonus that the Samaras party is enjoying right now, but which might go to Syriza. Please tell us.
They do include the bonus. The situation goes like this. Syriza is ahead on polls, on every poll, even the polls that are put out by the controlled media show a narrow margin, but in fact the distance is a lot bigger than it seems. The thing is that it's very difficult for Syriza to form a government by its own. It's not impossible, but it is quite difficult to have the absolute majority in parliament. You need to have the absolute majority to form a government and to maintain a government, to maintain its stability, because the vote of confidence of the parliament, of the absolute majority of the parliament, is essential for a government, or else it just falls.
Right.
Now, Syriza is ahead on polls, and it will be the winner. There is no chance that this New Democracy Party cannot overcome this. It's unchangeable. It will be the first party. Syriza will be the first party. The thing is, it's very difficult to find a coalition partner, to form a coalition government. Believe it or not, right now in Greece, in terms of reality and the actual political results produced, the traditional left-right paradigm has less meaning. Now, what has the real meaning right now at this point is the memorandum, anti-memorandum.
That is to say, most people would understand the International Monetary Fund conditionalities enforced by the Troika.
The memorandum is the holy Bible by which Greece has been governed for the last 5 years. It's the IMF diktat and the European Commission. Now, the thing is that there is one party of the right wing that is anti-memorandum, and this is actually the best bet for Syriza to have a coalition partner. The best bet for a radical left party is a right-wing anti-memorandum party, and they already say that they have agreed upon a basic economic program. So, but this party is very small right now. The polls show it at the limit of 3%, and you need 3% to get inside parliament, to get the parliament representation. And
what is the name of that party?
The name of that party is Anel, by a guy. The leader is Panos Kamenos. This party is very crucial if it gets inside parliament or not, because if it doesn't, then the only anti-memorandum forces inside parliament will be the left. It's essential, it's indispensable that there is a right-wing anti-memorandum representation inside parliament in the political field. That's my opinion, at least. Now, we would very much like, and it's not impossible, to have a Syriza government, an absolute majority of Syriza, but if Syriza doesn't make it, and Anel doesn't make it into parliament to help form a government, the other possible coalition partner is called the Potami. It means the river. It's a guy, a clown, a television producer. He used to make documentaries about social issues, but he does it in a way that never really challenges the system or the condition in which social problems are produced, but just the social problem. He shows it as a touristic, melancholic tour amongst the socially expelled or socially excluded people.
Okay.
My opinion, he is the big danger of this election, because he's a cultural leftist, but he's actually pro-austerity, and you can see this. It's a party massively boosted by the mass media, by the corporate media, and its role will be very dangerous, because if Syriza cannot form another government, it may be obliged to form a government with this party, and I must say this is a big danger, because they will not allow the whole of the program to be implemented. Now
you say the program, maybe we could just take a second and tell us what are they running on? What would the program be? And before we get to the program of the government, what is Syriza saying most prominently?
It runs on a few simple things. It's very wise, I think, that it keeps it simple. Just, we need, right now, at the point that we have come at this point, we need emergency humanitarian spending, social spending, to keep people alive. And don't think that we are talking about something massive or something crazy. We're talking about funds for people to have electricity in their homes. Free electricity for people who cannot afford electricity. It's despicable what is happening here in Greece.
Absolutely.
And the second point is a renegotiation of the debt and of the whole program from scratch, and an attempt to reform, to restructure the Eurozone to a more viable form. And I think that they will cave. The Europeans cannot go on this path forever. They will be obliged to cave. Now,
let me ask you about that. The last point interests me a great deal. Do they talk about restructuring the European Central Bank so that it gives credit for production and infrastructure?
Of course. It talks about a conference of restructuring the whole European,
right.
Eurozone.
The London Debt Conference of 1953.
Yes, something exactly like that.
Michael, stay with us for a second. This is so important. We'll just have go to break, and we'll be back, and maybe you give us a few more minutes, okay?
Okay.
Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. We're talking to Michael Chiotinis in Athens about the upcoming Greek election, right? The central event of world politics in many ways in this early part of 2015. And we're talking about the Syriza program and how it goes together with the question of how would they form a governing majority. Michael, let me just ask you here, what is stressed is that Syriza talks about tax evasion, that there are rich people who don't pay taxes, crack down on them. That seems reasonable, rule of law. And another one is the question of the oligarchs, that there are oligarchical businessmen who get things like free licenses of TV stations and things like this, which should be paid for, but which are given for free and things like that. Does that play a role at all in what you see there in Athens?
It plays a huge role. If Syriza wins and it forms a government, and if they are able to do this, if they are able to give the licenses to the TV channels, TV producers, that will be a change in the whole political field forever, because the fact that they are not licensed. It's not a question of money. It's not a question of to pay the license. It's a question of whether the media has an entanglement with power and with government. And the fact that they are not licensed, they do not have the legal license, keeps them entangled with whomever is in power.
Uh-huh.
And if they do this, the controlled media will change forever. The whole media field and political field and public discussion will change dramatically, and it will be a major shift. Because let's tell the truth here. The politics are formed by whomever the media choose.
By the television. The power of television is primary.
The power of television. Sure. And right now, the major component is fear. Fear is being used as the only chance for the old system to keep itself in power. It's funny, but you know about the terrorist attack on Charlie Hebdo.
Right.
It's maybe Samaras, the prime minister, is maybe the only political leader in Europe who tried to link his opposition rhetorically with the terrorist attack.
Absolutely. And we do have that interview with Hollande where he is relatively relaxed about the Greek election compared to the hysterical Merkel. And from our point of view, that may have played a role in going in the other direction. Let me just ask you a couple of final questions now. In terms of forming a majority, under the Greek system, can you have a party, say this Anel, can they be in the majority but not represented in the government with ministers? Does that ever happen?
It does happen, but there really is no problem for them to have representation in ministers.
Okay. And the other one I was going to ask you is, can you have a party that decides to abstain on the vote of confidence, and that makes it easier for a government to stay in power?
It does. And we hope that the Communist Party plays that role, because the Communist Party has really played a very nasty role in all of this. It refuses to cooperate for anything. And the thing is that the reason why you cannot form a government without the first party is because there are forces inside parliament who cannot form a government with anyone, cannot cooperate with anyone. It's the communists and the Nazis. And
the Nazis being what, this Golden Dawn, Chrissy Avni?
Yes. The Golden Dawn. The Golden Dawn has around 5%. I see their power being lowered. I was never afraid of them. They discredit themselves. They are hated by the majority of people. They could not ever form a mass movement. They could never do this. And although being Nazis, although they are Nazis, original Nazis, old Nazis, not neo-Nazis, they are old Nazis, but I was never afraid of them because they cannot produce a mass movement. What I fear in this election, remember that in 2012 in the election, I warned against Guy Zimeros, a libertarian proto-fascist.
Right.
I will now warn, it's my political opinion, I will now warn about the fascist danger of this party river, the Potami. Potami, yes. This guy, this television documentarist, who is...
Can you give us his name again so we can look him up?
He's Stavros Theodorakis.
Theodorakis?
Theodorakis, Stavros.
Any relation to the famous?
No, of course not. Of course not.
Okay, we don't know.
No relation whatsoever. But he talks about, solutions in practice and not in theory, and all these weird things,
Sounds like Beppe Grillo in some way.
Sounds like Beppe, yes, but without the anti-Euro rhetoric. He does not have he is absolutely pro-Euro. Pro-Euro, and in this he hides the pro-austerity position, because when you say we will do anything to stay in the euro, it means that I would like to keep the euro as it is and keep austerity as a rule, a general rule. And
the figure we've got here is that there have been 3,000 suicides in Greece since the austerity began. Now that's more than the U.S. losses in Iraq, I'm pretty sure, and that's a much smaller country. So I think this humanitarian aid, in other words, turn on electricity. Here in Michigan, we've got turn on the water. Over there, it's turn on the electricity. I think this is the same.
And turn on the people's, the faith in the system, the hope. Keep hope alive.
Right, but keep hope alive, not with rhetoric like Obama, but with some hot meals and some electricity and some jobs.
Of course. Keep the spirits up.
Okay. Michael, we're delighted to have you back. We're going to talk to you next week. So please keep this time every week free. We want to hear from you. And thank you very much for this illuminating report.
Thank you very much.
And we'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. That's a great report from Athens. I think we've got the inside track on what's actually going on in this all-important Greek election, which may blow the lid off the International Monetary Fund world system. Now, we're going to be joined here in a second by Daniela Walls, the president, the chairwoman, actually, of the Tax Wall Street Party. I'm just repeating, in Silver Spring, Maryland, we are going to have our class on the political economy of the American system. It is a seminar. It's philosophy, economics, politics, other issues. Starts at about 7 o'clock in the evening. Probably registration would probably start about 6 p.m. January 23rd, that's a Friday, and the seminar goes 23rd, 24th, 25th, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Send an email to taxwallstreetparty@gmail.com. Include your name and phone number, and we'll start the registration process. So, Daniela, I think you have the best overview of anybody of the situation of Reverend Pinkney. We've just tried to do an interview with him, and that prison there in Jackson, Michigan has held him incommunicado for a second week in a row. He's a political prisoner, and he's being prevented from speaking to the world. So please give us the update.
Prisoner. And I've gotten word from him and the prison that not RT can't get through, CNN can't get through, so no major news service can get through to Reverend Pinkney at this point. So I'm going to speak for him again. Today is the most important Reverend Edward Pinkney announcement that I'm making because it is January 10th and Reverend Pinkney's final sentencing is January 15th. That makes this the last update before the final sentencing. There's a lot that each individual can do now to affect the outcome of January 15th's final sentencing, but you have to do it. Like never before, this is not the time to be an idle spectator. So here we go. It is crystal clear that if a juror, in this case Gail Freeling, lied by omission during the voir dire, that the defendant, Reverend Edward Pinkney, is entitled to an evidentiary hearing on whether his lawyer, Tat Parrish, would have never let Gail Freeling serve on that jury. We need listeners to write a letter to Judge Chirac. This is the second round of letters. Send this letter out priority mail because it needs to arrive before January 15th. And if you are in a foreign country, fax a letter to 269-982-8643. All of this information will be at freepinkney.wordpress.com, freepinkney.wordpress.com. We have moved this specific information to the homepage, so it will be the first thing you see when you open the site. On the homepage, you will see sample letter to Judge Chirac from a lawyer. If you read the lawyer's main footnote on the letter in bolded text at the bottom of the page, he cites the Mann-Sear panel. That makes it very clear that the courts are likely going to reverse the trial court if Judge Chirac does not grant an evidentiary hearing on whether a preemptory challenge would have been made. This is the strongest legal position that has been raised and is going to be ruled one way or another on January 15th. Tat Parrish has asked for an evidentiary hearing. We need people in their letters to make sure that they let Judge Chirac know that he needs to grant an evidentiary hearing on whether there was prejudice. The test under Michigan law in that situation where the juror lies by omission is to have a hearing on would Tat have exercised his right to strike that juror, Gail Freeling. This is a slam dunk because all we would need to do at that point when we are granted the evidentiary hearing is put Tat up on the stand and Tat would say, hell yeah, I would have struck Gail Freeling had she answered that she was work colleagues with the prosecution. Judge Chirac has to grant us an evidentiary hearing. The judge is not being faithful to Michigan law if he does not at least grant an evidentiary hearing to determine if the juror would have been struck had she responded truthfully. I think the evidence or the emphasis, I think the emphasis in the letters from the activists needs to be on telling Judge Chirac that you, Judge Chirac, would not be faithfully honoring the law if you do not at least hold a hearing to make a determination on whether or not that juror would have been struck if she had revealed that she works closely with the key members of the prosecution, both Sheriff Paul Bailey and Clerk Sharon Tyler at the annual Blossom Time Festival Committee and the annual Flag Day Parade for at least the last 10 years. At this point, the best we could hope for is to get that evidentiary hearing. Gail Freeling hired a lawyer, and no wonder she hired a lawyer, Webster, because maybe she went to see that lawyer and he looked at it and did the same research our team has done and said, Sharon, you may be called to the witness stand in some evidentiary hearing coming up, and you may need me as your attorney. If Judge Chirac ultimately determined that if Gail Freeling would have spoken up that she would have been struck, then he has no other choice than to grant a new trial. Please do not simply copy and paste this letter. It was a well-researched effort meant only to inform your communications to Chirac within a legal framework. You are encouraged to share this letter in its entirety with lawyers to inform their work on the case. The lawyers, and there's something else I wanted to mention. The lawyers came to the preliminary conclusion that there is nothing improper in the sentencing him and taking him to prison before the motions for a new trial and briefs in support are heard. It's not morally right, but Michigan rules require the sentencing take place promptly, which technically it is, since it's only been 1 month from the preliminary hearing. But here's the good news. The lawyers have seen several other cases where motions for new trial were granted months after sentencing and imprisonment. So because because the judge could grant a retrial on January 15th, this is why we need another round of letters to Judge Chirac. Remember how he brought up the 130-plus letters from activists in all the media that he did, even though he found a way to mock them and say that they came from outside Southwest Michigan, etc. This time we have a sample letter from a lawyer. So what you write can be more than just opinion and emotion. Use what the lawyer wrote as a guideline to yourself, but do not copy it or make it seem like a duplicate. You remember that the judge said the last time that some of the letters were duplicates. This is because people copied and pasted the last sample letter that we had up to a month ago at freepinkney.wordpress.com. And when I put a task out for us to accomplish, it's up to each individual or each of you to use some shrewdness, because I can't anticipate what's going to, go right or wrong. So
absolutely correct. I would say people should paraphrase. They should put it a little bit in their own words, not word for word copying, but paraphrasing. Right? Vary it.
Right. Exactly. And so the information in the sample letter is just there to make sure you stay within a legal framework, like you said. So if you know a lawyer, send this sample letter to them and have them write something similar. This will help the lawyer or judge, with their research. The goal in this letter is to emphasize Judge Chirac's duties and responsibilities as a judge, and to ensure this conviction is free from all partiality on the part of the judge and jury toward the Whirlpool Corporation or the Upton family, etc. Canon 2, Section C, says that a judge should not allow family, social, or other relationships to influence judicial conduct or judgment. Reverend Pinkney is a longtime political activist, as we know, in Berrien County and Benton Harbor, and a well-known political opponent and critic of the Whirlpool Corporation and county government. Before and during the recall petition effort, Mr. Pinkney was the subject of frequent verbal attacks against his recall efforts by elected city and county officials. Shortly after his conviction, it was reported that Berrien County Sheriff Paul Bailey, who's a friend of that juror Gail Freeling, stated at a Republican Party meeting that we got Pinkney.
Correct.
So send your letters, Webster.
We got it. Daniela, thank you. People should send letters in precisely that way. And that's all at the website, which I'll repeat in the next segment. Thanks very much, Daniela. See you next week. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio, our last segment already, program of January 9th. So remember, the first place you want to go to is freepinkney.wordpress.com, freepinkney.wordpress.com. There you have everything, and in particular, letters to Judge Chirac. I think it's SCHROCK. And focus on the legal arguments that are given in that form letter, rephrase it, paraphrase it, and the fax number for these letters to go to the judge, 269-982-9, let's start from the beginning, 269-982-8643, and please do it now. Send it not just priority mail, but express mail. So it'll be there. If you send it on Saturday, it'll probably be there on Monday. That's the way to do it. Don't skimp on the postage. Now, to wrap up this situation, many important stories have been crowded away. Komsomolskaya Pravda has put out a very interesting interview. You can read it on Voltaire Network in English and in other Western languages. Take your pick. Here we have a guy called Captain Voloshin of the Ukrainian Air Force, Kiev branch. And here he's at an air base in eastern Ukraine flying a Sukhoi 25. And normally these planes don't carry air-to-air missiles, but on the day that the famous Malaysian airliner was tragically shot down last July, Captain Voloshin took off in his Su-25 loaded with air-to-air missiles, and according to an eyewitness interviewed by Komsomolskaya Pravda, when he came back, the air-to-air missiles were all gone. No more missiles had he shot them off. Well, yes, I would say that's a very plausible story. And indeed, you remember this question about it looked like pellets that had come in from the outside, passed through the plane. Well, they've got these Su-25s of the Ukrainian Air Force have missiles that essentially explode in a kind of shotgun or canister pattern. Okay. So remember, as we go back to wrap up on the Charlie Hebdo and everything else, the Kouachi brothers and their friend Koulibaly and indeed Hayat Boumediene still fleeing, these are the patsies that are accused, they're all well known to the police, absolutely known. Just like that guy in Australia a couple of weeks ago, right? The guy who attacked the Starbucks. That guy was well known to the police. He was even out on bail for a murder case, right? Multiple sexual offenses. We went through all of that. So this is a cell. How can a cell be permitted to exist in Paris under the nose of the famous French police, right? What happened to Inspector Maigret or somebody else should have been there for it? We've got, again, Le Pen is a demagogue. Le Pen is calling for the death penalty. She wants to reinstitute the death penalty in France as a result of this. I remember when the Aldo Moro case took place, we had Ugo Lamalfa, NATO agent, now departed, but he called for the death penalty. In other words, let's descend into barbarism because somebody's running ops. He wants, and obviously her bracket is scapegoat Muslims for the depression. Now, this parallel, I would remind everybody of the Mohammed Merah case, M-E-R-A-H. Look it up on tarpley.net. Merah, M-E-R-A-H. This was at Toulouse. This was just as the French presidential campaign was getting going, and the CIA thought that they could keep their man Sarkozy in power. Remember, his real name ought to be Sarkozy Wisner, because he grew up in the household of Frank Wisner, CIA State Department family, going back many, many decades. This guy Wisner, by the way, just in 2011 was part of the op to dump Mubarak. I think he tried to put Mubarak into a fool's paradise, that the U.S. was going to support him, because that's what he came out saying. I think that was psychological warfare, strategic deception against Mubarak. Maybe Mubarak would like to make a statement about the lies that were told to him by Wisner. Anyway, that guy's the stepfather of Sarkozy, so you see why. But right now it looks like they think that Madame Le Pen, or Mademoiselle Le Pen, or whatever she is, should be the one. And now, Merah, remember him, Toulouse. He is allowed to remain at large, I use these words advisedly, to do 3 attacks riding around on a motor scooter, and then he's cornered, and they make sure that his mouth is closed forever. He is liquidated. And that was a big enough scandal to have a lawsuit filed. If you look on the Internet, you will find the lawyer for his father, and this is Isabelle Coutant-Père. It's Peyre. That's the lawyer for Mohammed Merah's father. And the contention there was that Mohammed Merah was executed in cold blood, murdered according to orders from inside the French secret services. And this is done by Le Raid. Le Raid, that is the special forces or Delta Force, whatever you want to call it, the SEAL team, SEAL brigade. That's Le Raid, and apparently they are penetrated by these, obviously by the French intelligence forces. And you'll go back to Merah, you will find that Yves Bonnet, Bonnet, the former head of the French equivalent of the FBI, came out after the death of Merah in about a week and said, well, Merah was an informant. He was essentially an asset of the DST, the French equivalent of the FBI. And they had sent him on a tour around the Middle East to try to impress the jihadi networks. They got him into Israel with his French passport. He went to Afghanistan, went to Israel, all over the Middle East. This came from Il Foglio, I believe. They wanted to invent a cover story, right? A legend for him. He filmed his killings, allegedly. There was supposedly a video that was passed to Al Jazeera, but this was then suppressed. I don't think anybody's ever seen the video that he allegedly took, but he's been obviously convicted posthumously for this. So the tracks in this case went back to two people. Claude Guéant, this is the former Interior Minister of France, Police Minister, and Bernard Squarcini, Squarcini, the former head of the DGSE, I believe. No, I'm sorry, the head of the essentially of the DST, right? Different name now, but internal, FBI. So these two guys were running Merah as one of their agents. And nevertheless, he's not rounded up, and they can't find him. And then at the end, once this has come to its full dramaturgic fruition, then he's assassinated. Now, this Charlie Hebdo, again, it starts in 1960 at the same time that the Western intelligence, U.S., British, were pushing the anti-de Gaulle operations, things like the Situationist International. Remember them? But it was called Harikiri. This was a Vichy group. This was people left over from the Pétain era. And more recently, it's not really an opposition organ. For example, the former editor of Charlie Hebdo, Philippe Val, V-A-L, former editor of Charlie Hebdo, is now the director of France Inter. In other words, he's the director of the principal radio station in the country where Hollande gave this famous interview. And as far as the late cartoonist Sharp goes, his wife, girlfriend, is a former minister in the Sarkozy government. It's a very strange, but the effect is, as we've said, anti-Assad, anti-Putin, anti-Hollande, and pro-war. It's time to get a little bit skeptical. Otherwise, we're going to have free speech for everybody, except for those who don't accept the official version. And you do not accept the official version. It's full of hope. It's full like a Swiss camembert. So we'll see you next week on Book Crisis Radio. And remember the seminar starting January 23rd, 7 p.m.